Tonight's meet came about as the result of our last 4RG meet when we hosted Kathy Orlando, who's the founder of Citizens Climate Lobby Canada. At that meet, Kathy invited us to take part in the People's Ministry of the Future, which is a CCL conference in Ottawa that brought together many experts in the field of climate change action and provided the opportunity and the training to lobby our federal MPs on the issue of climate change policy.
So as a result of that, Kathy very warmly invited us to go to Ottawa, and Scott, Vanessa, and Guy were able to attend. And I had an engagement I couldn't get out of, but I was able to watch all of the presentations over Zoom. And I also want to point out that all of those presentations are available on Zoom right now. If you go to their YouTube channel, you'll see them all. They're really good. And so what we're going to do tonight is share some of our takeaways from the conference. And one of the common takeaways was, how do we be a good ancestor? And so that became the title of this meeting this evening, and is a common theme in our land acknowledgement.
For Our Grandchildren respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaties First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of the lands and waters of the Peterborough-Ogojiwanong area in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure the health and integrity of these lands and waters for generations to come. Now, given today's date, I would also like to acknowledge the sacrifices made by First Nations people, as well as many other of our ancestors during the First and Second World Wars, and several military confrontations since then, in order to preserve the freedoms and rights of Canadians for generations to come. Now, the idea of ensuring the rights and freedoms, the resources, the cultures, the lands, and the waters for generations, specifically 7 generations, is a concept that most of us are familiar with. But you might ask yourself, why 7 generations? And it seems an arbitrary number, and it seems like it's far into the future and hard to kind of relate to. But I want to explore that just a little bit. If any of you have a memory of a great-grandparent, then yeah, you raise your digital hand there, and we'll see whether we've got people here. There we are. We have great-grandparents represented in our memories here. So those people, put your hands back down. And now what I want you to do, and I'm pretty sure we've got a few of these, if you are fortunate enough to have a great-grandchild currently, could you raise your digital hand for that? All right, well, we've got at least a couple. Count that up. That's 7 generations represented right here in this group through our memories that we can relate to, that we know about. And so when we talk about 7 generations, we're talking about people that we know, people that we have interacted with in one way or another as a group of people. And so that's kind of the backdrop to today's meet.
I spent a lot of time growing up in a forest behind our house in Guelph. It was a place where I felt a lot of peace. I remember being 7 or 8 years old, and I just watched something about, I think it was about Jane Goodall's work. I remember crossing the street. It's like a flashbulb memory. I was crossing the street to see if my friend could come out and play. I remember thinking, like, what's wrong with the grown-ups? Like, why are they letting all of this happen? It was so puzzled. And I think that's a question that has guided me ever since. Just about everything I've done, my work as an educator, a naturalist, a crisis responder, a facilitator of forest bathing and expressive arts programs. It's really all about helping people reconnect, with themselves, with nature, fostering care for their own well-being, and helping them to feel inspired to take care of the earth. I was really interested in what Catherine McKenna had to say during the presentation. She said we need to do 3 things. We need to reduce emissions, we need to scale up the solutions, and we need to offer support for developing countries. And so that's what I'd like to talk about. Catherine said the carbon tax would never have been passed without groups and individuals writing letters, getting out on the streets, making phone calls to tell the tell the politicians what you want. And she said, otherwise, I felt like I was the only one at a table of ministers that wanted this thing. But when I knew all these other people wanted this carbon tax and other policies, I felt really empowered. And the second thing that she implied was it's important to tell politicians what you know, because they don't know everything. And I remember being in one of my classes in environmental science at university, and the prof said, you know, most politicians don't come from a science background. They don't really understand the science of some of this stuff. And, you know, if I look at the list of people who are here tonight, there's so much experience and wisdom and knowledge that just this group holds. And it's so important to share that with our politicians. So she credits, as I said, the passing of the carbon tax to people writing letters and getting out on the street. And then she said, your work isn't done. Hold politicians accountable. She said, because once the carbon tax was passed, and as I'm sure everyone here knows, you know, there's so much good about the carbon tax. Like the guy who proposed it in 2018, The Economist, won the Nobel Prize in economics for that. It's cheaper than other regulatory devices. It was a really great way of communicating to people that their emissions were important and encouraging them to do things to reduce their emissions. But she said when the carbon tax was passed, environmental groups turned their attention to other things. And she said, I needed you to keep on telling politicians and other people why it mattered, because sometimes politicians mess up. She, in her presentation, which you can watch on YouTube, talks about all the ways that the Liberal Party messed up. And as you know, sometimes politicians play games, and this carbon tax became very politicized. So Carney, people say, had no choice but to cancel that unpopular carbon tax. The the consumer carbon tax. The industrial carbon tax is in the last budget, but it's pretty vague. And something I recently learned is it only covers about 1/3 of all the emissions that are put out by manufacturers and resource developers. So she said, in addition to recognizing how important your voice is, she said, it's not just your voice, it's the voice of people from all sectors in society. So then we heard from Beth Lorimer, who is from Kairos, and she talked about a campaign called Jubilee 2025. And it comes from the Jewish tradition, this idea of canceling debt, releasing slaves, returning land to their proper owners. So this is like a long history in Jewish tradition. Every 25 years is a Jubilee year. The Catholic Church took this on, and now other churches have taken it on. So to Catherine McKenna's point, she needs to hear from all sorts of groups. In the year 2000, $100 billion of debt was canceled because of the Jubilee. And I'm just very aware of time. I don't want to talk for too long, but as we all know here, climate change really is a result of wealthy nations polluting for free, and it's hurting the nations who have done the least to cause it. She pointed out that 3.3 billion people live in countries that spend more on the debt interest than they do on education or health. And because of the impacts of climate on their infrastructure, there's another way that they're having to pay even more. So this Jubilee 2025 is another Jubilee year, and Kairos is asking for people to let their political leaders know that they support this. I'm going to give you the link for a petition in the chat when I'm finished. These are the 3 things that they're asking for, not just debt cancellation, but also global financial reform and a debt resolution framework within the United Nations that is binding, transparent, and fair. And so that was those are 2 of my biggest takeaways, you know, how important it is that we get involved. And one way to get involved, and you'll hear more this evening, is, by signing this petition and sharing it with your family and your friends.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, we're thrilled to have a special guest with us this evening, Vanessa Fiore. She was named one of Starfish Canada's top 25 under 25 environmentalists in the year 2020. And she was the winner of the first ever Commission for Environmental Cooperation. She is an environmentalist and a conservationist based out of Ottawa, although we tried to convince her she should move to Peterborough. She's been a dedicated volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby Canada for the past 10 years, leading the Vaughan chapter and meeting with countless MPs and senators. We heard some great stories when we went up for dinner a couple of weeks ago of how some of those have unfolded. And she's been doing this since she was 16. I wasn't doing that when I was 16. You got some courage. Right now, she works as a team lead at the Canadian Museum of Nature. She is also developing a community project to tackle microplastic pollution in the Ottawa River with support from Waterlootion and the Canada Service Corps. Over the years, she's also gained experience in ecological restoration, clean energy, climate policy, electrification, scientific research, all driven by her passion for protecting the planet and inspiring others to take action. So over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for the intro. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Just going to be mindful of the time, but yes, I did come to Peterborough 2 weeks ago, actually. I was at the Trent Restoration Conference. It was my first time there. It's very beautiful. I really liked it, and especially the river going through it. So yeah, I'm super excited. Similar vein of we're going to be talking about our takeaways from CCL. Because I've been part of the organization for so long, I'm going to be talking a little bit about a topic that I'm super passionate about. I'm just going to start my slideshow here. Can everyone see my screen? A big focus of mine, something that I'm very interested in, especially having been a citizen lobbyist for the past 10 years, is trying to make climate action nonpartisan, because as I'm sure we're all aware, it's a very big challenge when the topic of climate change is discussed in a very partisan way. So before getting into it, because I'm new and a lot of us haven't met before, I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction on who I am and how it started. So when I was in school, I actually started, I guess, my climate advocacy when I was 10. I joined my school's eco club. And then in high school, I became the president of the Eco Council. So I always know I was very passionate about climate action and climate change and trying to find solutions to it. But I wanted to take that passion outside of the school grounds as well. So I did research on different organizations and nonprofit organizations working within the climate space. And when I was 16, I joined CCL. So I'm 26 now. At the time, it made me the youngest volunteer lobbyist, but fortunately, there's been a lot younger people who have joined, including Sophia Mather, who some of you might have heard of. She's part of the delegation that's suing the Ford government right now over their rights to a clean environment. But I'm sure you heard a little bit about CCL, but just a really brief description. So it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan grassroots advocacy organization funded by Canadians. And the main focus, well, there's two. It's to create political will for a livable planet. So training volunteers like us to go out and lobby, which I'm sure Kathy talked about last time. And then also to empower people to be able to claim their political and personal power with regards to that. So these are some pictures actually from when I first started lobbying 10 years ago. So when I was 16. The cool thing about these photos is this one right over here, it's actually a conservative caucus that I lobbied. So all of the MPs that were part of this were conservative. And then right over here was a tweet from my MP at the time, Deb Schultz. I'm originally from Vaughan. So she was the MP for King Vaughan, and she actually posted me on her Twitter, which was really sweet. So my biggest takeaways after lobbying for 10 years, well, politicians, believe it or not, are everyday people. I know sometimes, one time Bruce, he's a former MP and a volunteer at CCL, he made a joke that they have reptilian brains. And I'm sure sometimes we think that, especially when looking at the media and the decisions that are made, but they are everyday people who are representing their communities and their constituencies. So it's really important that you talk to them and you address them like one. Also, it's whenever you lobby, and at least from my experience, it's not necessarily about getting your point across, you come in, you have certain asks, but the most important thing that you go in with these meetings in mind is that you want to build long-term relationships and eventually garner their support on what you're talking about. But in order to do that, you need to facilitate just having conversations, not necessarily trying to convince them you're right or that they need to follow your opinion. Also, citizen lobbying, to me, whenever I do it, I feel like it's one of the most effective ways to advocate for climate action and climate policy. And sometimes the results aren't immediate, and we'll see that in my next slide. But if you remain consistent, there will be results. Whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, there's always, I feel like it makes a great impact. So that being said, my original point of my presentation was how can we make climate change nonpartisan? Now, this is obviously a complex question. I'm not saying I have the answer to this because the partisanship of climate change goes way back to when oil and gas lobbyists were releasing disinformation about their industries and how it was polluting the environment, what climate change was. That was back in the 70s. So there's obviously a lot to deconstruct there. But in terms of as a citizen lobbyist approaching your parliamentarian, the best way to do it is just, like I mentioned, facilitating conversations like they're a person and expressing your care about the environment and trying to get a common ground from them. So that being said, these are some pro tips I have when it comes to lobbying, citizen lobbying. And one of them is actually to obviously prepare in advance, but you need to do research specifically on the member of parliament that you are lobbying to recognize their values, what party they're with, and what they stand for, because that way you can cater your asks and what you're going to talk about to them in order to facilitate finding that common ground. Also, a really big topic that is discussed at every single national conference with CCL is motivational interviewing. So that means asking open-ended questions. The whole point of these meetings, especially when you're meeting a member of parliament for the first time, is you want them to talk 90% of the time. You want to do as little talking as possible. You want to listen to them, get their input, get their feedback and their opinions. So that way you could kind of create a basis of conversation to go off of that kind of shows that you are aligned with them. You're in support of what they do. So that way they'll mutually support you back. And that being said, you do need to pivot the conversation a little bit based off of their responses to your questions. At CCL, we always say that your number one goal to lobbying a member of parliament is to get a second meeting every time. So that's why we really emphasize don't go in headstrong with whatever asks you have and start arguing or I guess it doesn't need to be a debate. That's not to say a back and forth discourse isn't bad per se, but it's usually better when you're farther along in your relationship. And just to have harder conversations is fine. But in order to get a second meeting, you really are trying to just get an idea of who they are and, show yourself as someone who is an ally. So, and usually we try to lobby them twice a year. So one in the spring, one in the fall. And then the biggest point, I mentioned it a little bit on my last slide, is consistency is key. So having these repeated conversations twice a year and building relationship goes a long way. You're obviously not going to have the same asks every time, and you're not going to have the same conversations every time. And that's great. That's what we're looking for. We do have sort of seasonal asks. So this consistency was proven back in 2018 when the federal government passed a Climate Action Incentive Act, which basically put forward the carbon fee and dividend policy, which is what we were advocating for since 2010. So from 2010 to 2018, for 8 years, we were consistently lobbying the government. At that point, it had been 13 times between fall and spring in total that we had lobbied the government through our national conferences. And then finally, through 8 years of hard work and consistent effort, we finally got a carbon pricing backstop in place on a federal level. So a senator from Edmonton, his name is Grant Mitchell, he did tell us, you are one of the most successful lobbying groups I've worked with because you're about to get what you lobbied for. So that once again just shows that if you're consistent with it, you can achieve it. Now, that being said, I know it's 2025. With the recent political elections or federal elections that have happened, we know that the carbon pricing system has been taken down. But like Beth was saying in her previous presentation, it is really important that it should have been a continuous conversation instead of pivoting to other things, just so politicians recognize that there are citizens who do value it and do want to see a carbon pricing mechanism in place. So I want to just conclude with these photos. So these were actually all taken in 2025. This was when we lobbied a Liberal MP. This was my Conservative MP from Vaughan. I just told him I'm still in Vaughan just so I could lobby him. But and then this was a picture that some of us CCLers took by this poster here. So yeah, consistency and dedication is I feel what wins the race. You know what they say, that the turtle wins the race in the end. I don't know the exact saying, but yeah, thank you guys so much for your attention.
Yeah, that's fabulous, Vanessa. And I should mention that this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to our channel, as have been all of the presentations we've done over the last 5 years. So if you didn't catch the Citizens Climate Lobby presentation in September, that's there. And if you want to watch any of this again, you can check that out in a couple days.
Yeah, great advice there, because I know for one, I'm petrified to go do the lobbying thing, and slowly working up courage. And but yeah, we heard from Beth, we heard from you. It makes a difference, and it's something that we all kind of need to see what we can do about. So thank you for that. Right, next up we have Guy, and Guy has cared about environmental issues since he was a Boy Scout. I can just envision him with his little, everything. Yeah, perfect. Same look, except without the beard. And so that was in his teens, where he learned to leave his campsite better than he found it. He became passionate about advocating for action to combat the climate crisis when his granddaughter was born in 2010. When she asks, "Grandpa, you knew it was bad. Why didn't you do more?" He wants to be able to reply, "I did what I could." And he's the president of 4RG and has been a member of Citizens Climate Lobby since 2013. Take it away, Guy.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks very much, Vanessa. I guess I had to check the dates because Vanessa said she'd been a member since then too, so it was great. I keep seeing her every year and saying, "Oh, look at that, she's growing up." Anyway, I had several observations about just sort of my overall feeling while I was at this conference, and one was it's just great to be among friends who I'd known for 15 years. One of them was one of the people who was in that last picture. One of the last pictures that Vanessa showed was Kathy Lacroix, and she said, "Oh, Guy, if you live in Peterborough, you should meet James Byrne." And she said, "I knew him at Waterloo." And I said, "Well, yeah, I know him. It's okay." And another thing was that one of the reasons that we were going there was really to have an opportunity to lobby with Emma Harrison, but she was unable to show up except she came to breakfast. And she came to breakfast a little bit late. So the only thing I got to ask her about was, have you managed to make contact with Malika Collette, who many of you know is now 17 or maybe 18. She's going to university at Carleton, and she was trying to meet with Emma. And so she got back to me today and said that the thing that she wanted to talk to Emma about was getting the Youth Climate Corps included in the budget. And she told me that yes, she had got that included. She also told me that in spite of what Emma told me at breakfast, she still hasn't reached out to Malika. Anyway, there were quite a few talks about during the conference about the fact that rebellions are built on hope, which is a quote from the Star Wars prequel that happens in Andor. And it starts the rebellion that leads to the destruction of the Death Star. And at one point when Kathy Orlando was wrapping up, she implied the Death Star is really the fossil fuel industry. And I'm hoping we can destroy it. And last on this sort of generic thing is that Emma is a mother of 3, and she believes that what she does feel is an importance. We need to give her the courage to act in alignment with her values, because her values are aligned with ours. We just need to let her know as a human, and as Vanessa said, that's what politicians are. They're just people, and we in a lot of cases know more than them. So I had been planning to talk about Catherine McKenna, but apparently we got our wires crossed and Beth did. But she's a dynamic speaker. I bought 2 copies of her book, one for my daughter Marie, who's whose daughter was what inspired me to get really involved, and a second copy as a gift for our favorite counselor, Joy LaChica. And I have yet to take it to her, but I've told her that it's here, so I guess I have to take it to her soon. And the sections about the abuse that women in politics endure, I believe, will be a comfort for Joy. And one of the things that you didn't mention about Catherine was that one of her rules for herself was to be true to myself, which is a theme that goes throughout this, is that people who are true to themselves can live with themselves, and they can be confident in themselves. And she said that pricing carbon pollution in the form of the industrial carbon price remains important, and reminded us, as Beth said, how important input from citizens in getting the original carbon tax passed, and it will be to make sure that the pedal stays on the metal for the industrial carbon tax, because every time you listen to it, it sounds like, oh, this is at risk. This is at risk of being diluted or taken away. But the most concrete thing I'd like to talk about was something which I've heard about for quite a while, which is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. The founder was there, and she was struck by the fact that the climate accord in 2015 in Paris doesn't say anything about oil or gas or coal. And it talks about the fact that we need to not only stop burning it, but we have to stop digging it up. And if we dig it up, we'll burn it. And if we let the market phase it out, it'll take too long. And the wind down will be chaotic, with every country wanting to have the last barrel that is sold. It's got three pillars to their transition, which is a just transition, a non-proliferation, and a fair phase out. I asked her how to answer people who claim that if we don't produce the last barrel of oil, somebody else will. And her response was quite illuminating. She says it's no longer true. Demand for oil is softening. It is going down. It's not true that somebody will be will produce it if we don't. And the second thing that she said was leadership matters. Our country and we can inspire others. We can show the way to an orderly wind down. The president of Colombia, an oil-producing company, replied when he asked the similar question, "I know that every day we are making the problem worse, and we can't stop without international cooperation." My problem with the whole concept of this is that it's a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is, how can we make this a local issue? So I'm not really completely sure how we can, but 17 Canadian municipalities have signed on to encourage our own federal government to sign on to this non-proliferation treaty. And it's primarily led by a Canadian, and we should consult with somebody else who was at the conference, Sophia Lindman from Stand.Earth in Halifax, to help us figure out an approach. So I think that what I would like to see is us add that to our requests of our current council to sign on to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And that's about it for me. Thank you very much for listening. But this non-proliferation treaty is really important. Instead of attacking the burning of the stuff at the end and blaming ourselves for burning too much, we need to attack the system right from the beginning. Let's not dig it up in the first place. Scott, you're speaking. I see your lips moving, but you're on mute.
And what I said was so wise.
Yeah, that was amazing. I don't think I've ever heard you say anything like that before.
No, I was just saying, well, thank you, first of all, Guy. And also, if you want more details on that non-proliferation agreement treaty, you need to go to CCL and look up that chunk of video and listen to it firsthand. And but that was a great summary of it, Guy, and really highlighted the main principles of it.
Yeah, all the speakers were so enthusiastic. Really, it was so good to listen to them. So we'll pass things over to Scott. First of all, I'll let you know a little bit about him. He is a lifelong naturalist and a biologist with a passion for the natural environment. He likes to bike and hike and curl. Every time he comes home from curling, I ask him if he was a rock star that day. He likes to go birding, and more recently has become a disc golfer, which, if you don't know what that is, it's like throwing a frisbee on a golf course, kind of. As a retired high school science teacher, he contributes to several citizen science programs. He sits on the executive of the climate change group for our grandchildren. We both do. And he leads outings with the Peterborough Field Naturalists and the Ontario Field Ornithologists. Over to you.
Okay, thank you for that, Beth. All right, so both Beth and Guy mentioned things about the industrial price on carbon pollution and how vital it is that each of us continue to lobby our politicians to maintain this important tool in reducing carbon pollution. If we don't keep the pressure on, it will be weakened. It will be removed, like the consumer one was. Dr. David Kershaw from Generation Squeeze also touched on that topic and provided a toolkit for doing just that. And you can actually take your phone and hover over the screen right now and get a link for their toolkit and on how to keep the pressure on if you're interested in doing that. But the thing about what Dr. Kershaw said that really kind of struck me was the approach to making things happen. He suggests that rather than trying to convince skeptics with facts and statistics, that we should be using shared values and emotions to make our point. We keep the statistics and logic in our back pocket to support that message, but we don't make the statistics the message. People just don't really want to hear that, especially if they're skeptics. And as an example, during the last election, of course, the tax movement didn't fight with facts. They fought with feelings. They tapped into people's fears, their frustrations, and fatigue over affordability. It really didn't matter that most households were actually making more money on the carbon rebate than they spent on the consumer carbon pricing. That explanation was too long, too late, and too nuanced. And it replied too much on the head and not enough on the heart. In the end, emotions trumped facts, and the Liberal Party had to drop the consumer price in order to win the election. And so feelings won. And so that's why the idea of being a good ancestor is a good framework to build change. Which epitaph are you going to want on your gravestone? In fact, which epitaph would climate deniers want? Even if they're, have doubts about climate science, they don't want to be thought of as the ancestor that let down their descendants. And so we need to use those emotions and those feelings of responsibility. We can't betray our children and grandchildren and have them deal with the compounding cost of today's free pollution. It's our cost to bear. And so how do we set these values-based approach into action? Well, the Generation Squeeze, their approach is built on 3 pillars, supporting 5 priorities. Be good stewards. There's nobody that doesn't really agree with that. Preserve what we hold sacred for those who follow: a healthy childhood, a healthy home, a healthy planet. Nobody in any political environment is going to say no to those. Everybody wants healthy children, healthy home, good homes, and a healthy planet. So we need to hit those as reasons as opposed to throwing stats around. Follow the golden rule. Everybody knows the golden rule. So treat all generations as you would want your own generation to be treated. It's not just about us, just not about one group. And then plan for all ages. Use your public resources wisely. Meet Canadians' needs from the early years and onwards, right? It's not just the working class that we need to worry about in our politics. We need to worry about seniors. We need to worry about the young people, the children, and the young people trying to make their way. All of that is pretty important stuff if you want to reach out emotion-wise or values-wise. There's 5 kind of other priorities kind of built on those pillars, And so, of course, with climate justice, we're talking about subsidies going towards low carbon energy sources as opposed to high energy carbon sources. Housing affordability, it's all part of the same thing. If people feel secure in what they're doing, they are going to then be able to contribute in a more healthy and environmental way to the world around them. And so things like non-market housing, which they're doing a bit of that in Whistler. My daughter's involved in, means you don't pay as much for a house, but you also can't sell it for a giant profit. And so it becomes more affordable. You know, many different things. And of course, you can go to the website. It's called Generation Squeeze. And if you go to that website, you can find all their different suggestions and approaches to doing these things and making a difference. But the bottom line is, like everyone else says, we have to keep the pressure on, and perhaps we use our ability to tap into emotions and forming relationships, as Vanessa said, in order to be able to make those changes happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. I'd like to end with a quote by Catherine McKenna before we open this up for discussion. She said, "You are on the right side of history. You are on the right side of the planet, and you are on the right side for our kids." So with that, yeah, there's been some good comments made in the chat. We could ask those folks if you'd like to speak up. And if anyone has any other questions or comments, now is the time. If you could just raise your hand, and then we'll coordinate who's speaking. Cheryl and Patty, I'm calling on you.
Yeah, Cheryl made a comment I saw earlier about, you know, as we're talking about consumer pricing on fossil fuels, what about our consumption in general? We all consume a lot more of everything, including energy, regardless of where that energy comes from. We consume a lot more of it than the last generation did. And they consume less than the generation before them. So that is part of the answer, is making sure that we get our consumption levels down, not just clean energy, but less of it.
Cheryl,
Add to
I
that,
see
Cheryl.
you've unmuted yourself. Would you like to speak to that?
Thanks, Scott. You kind of gave my summary. I was a history major in university, and that penchant for going into the past and looking to what to preserve stays with me. And I hearken back to the days of, some people will still recall Transition Town and its local experiment with a local currency. It was good while it lasted. It made people think. But the word that was behind it all was localization. And so much of what we do and so much of where our money goes is outside of our community. So I just invite us to hold on to that old idea of buy local, think local, spend local, invest local, and take a look around your own neighborhood, our own backyards, our own kitchens, as to where we're having a detrimental effect on the climate on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So I think I'm unmuted. It's Patty MacDonald.
Hi, Patty. Yeah, go ahead,
Hi.
Patty.
Yeah. Cheryl, I read your report a few years ago on housing and have watched you over the years and was so impressed with the numbers and data that you presented, because for me, it was information that I was not aware of. And I'm talking about several years ago when we were trying to work locally with various candidates and not end up with the governments that we are now looking at. And I guess maybe I was the only one that raised my hand, because I am a great-grandmother, great-grandmother. And I've watched my granddaughter and her family struggle the last few years. And I've been very aware for a long time that so many things that we do are systemic, and they're stacked against other generations, which is interesting because of the slides that Scott was showing and discussing. And we don't talk about it very much. the usurious rate interest rates that we routinely charge people for their credit cards. It's easy to say, well, maybe we shouldn't be buying things on credit, but when you're 25 or 26 years old and you're trying to feed a family and you're underemployed or unemployed, and we've got unemployment rates among this age group that are approaching 20%. There are just so many things, and if they don't have somebody like me to sort of bail them out at times, it's tough. And I agree with lots of things that we're doing, but I think I just keep thinking back to a lot of what we has been timing and at the expense of future generations on so many levels. And so I have a lot of concerns that I that I routinely share with anybody who's listening. Guy knows this. And most recently, I've been very focused on Emma because I worked very hard to get somebody other than Michelle Ferrari elected, and we still have Dave Smith, and we're looking at governments that for the last 10 years have worked backwards. And I know that we need to be patient and persistent and all of that, but I just see our windows of opportunity getting smaller every year and things moving forward. And I know that everybody here is amazing. I mean, I know a lot of you personally. Some of you I just know of you and I've watched you. So I love sitting in on these sessions, and I did watch the climate lobby episode and was so impressed by, I forget her name now, and would have loved to have been there in Ottawa with you, but I wasn't able to go. But I did find it very interesting, and there's so many things going on in this province. I recently went to something in Muskoka maybe a month ago, and watched what their watershed council was doing. And I get excited about all of these things, and I try and share them with different people locally, and just wonder how we bring these united voices together and actually move our governments forward. The budget really disappointed me. I'm not saying it was anybody's fault, and I'm a huge fan of Mark Carney's. I read his book years ago, and I was thrilled that we have him. I can't imagine anybody better positioned than him to move us forward. But I just wonder why we're still why are we still subsidizing fossil fuels? It's great to say leave them in the ground, but we still as a government, we're torn in so many directions. We're still subsidizing things that we all know the money could be better spent and differently spent. So, I'm not on a soapbox here. I'm here to listen. But there are things that to me are systemic in our system, and I don't know how we get a united voice to actually address them. And I'll just keep plugging away as best I can, and we'll all do what we can. But I just wonder locally if there's something more that we could do collectively, because we still seem to all be working in silos so hard. And there's so many organizations that I'm aware of, and Guy and I have had these conversations, and we've got municipal elections coming up, and these are things that I'm already thinking about. So I'm just really glad you're here. I think you're one of the most amazing organizations I've ever had the opportunity to observe. I've never been directly involved with you, but I do follow what you do closely, and you are action oriented. And I'm just grateful that you're here. So I will unmute myself at this point, and there's my 2 cents for the things that we've been talking about tonight. And I know we'll just continue to do our best. I just don't know how we do it in a more united way. One last thing, and I did mention this, I think, to Guy and some others. There was recently in Selwyn and North Kawartha and Trent Lakes got together and had they called it a quad council meeting at Curve Lake, which I was very excited to find out about. And I just sort of stumbled onto it. But they're meeting on an annual basis, the 3 townships, and I wish they'd add Duro Dummer, but there's a good example of the roots of something that may be, and I don't know how Peterborough County or Peterborough, the city of Peterborough, but somehow we need to unite all of these municipalities into something that we can focus on. And there was the point that the lady from the CL, whatever the climate lobby, laser focused. And that's always been one of my biggest challenges. I'm not laser focused. I'm laser focused on bigger pictures and how to bring them together, but I've never been able to just focus on any one thing long enough. So
thanks for the kind words there,
yeah,
Patty.
I'll
And
be quiet. As I
yeah,
said, I'll just mute myself now, and there we go.
and yeah, I mean, it's bringing everybody together under kind of one umbrella in the region to have a shared goal is a really interesting thought. And I know Guy has had some thoughts about that as well. And first we have David up though, and then maybe, I'm not sure if Guy was going to talk about that, but he's got other questions as well. So David, can you take it away, please? And you're still muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. I had a sort of a comment and a question for Vanessa. Number one, thanks for everything you do. We need about 1 million of you out there. Youth is so important. By the way, I'm very proud that one of my granddaughters is on this call, and she is about your age. So I'm thrilled she's on the call and involved in this. But I love the approach you talk about with politicians, because too often when we do get to see them, or when we're posting on Facebook, we tend to yell at them and not develop really meaningful relations. And I think we could work on that. But my question is, you mentioned the turtle wins the race. As people have worked with me on 4RG know, my hope level is not very high. And I guess my question to you is twofold. One, do we have time to be a turtle to win a race, or do we have to do something more quickly? And secondly, as a relatively young woman, are you hopeful that I'm curious to know what your hope meter's at. Get mine up, will you? But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your kind words. That's very sweet. And I'm glad your granddaughter was able to make it to the presentation. So yeah, those are really good, valid questions. So I'll answer your first one in terms of, should we be going at a turtle speed? I mean, in terms of the IPCC says no. The Paris Climate Agreement says no. We need to get to 50% of GHG emissions by 2030 and then net zero by 2050. We know those. Canada has adopted those and signed on to the framework, said that we were going to accomplish it. And from the studies that I've seen recently, we're not on track to meet that, which is at least the 2030 target, which is really frustrating, because we talk about, like, a lot of the debate, a lot of the discourse that I hear, and even from members of parliament on both sides, not just conservatives, like liberals too. I'm not too sure about NDP. I didn't lobby any NDP or Green this year, unfortunately, so I don't really know their current opinions, but they're always emphasizing the need for a transition, right? And I do understand it, because we can't stop cold turkey. We rely a lot on fossil fuels right now. We just don't have the infrastructure to support a full stop as much as I want it. I worked in electrification before, and even just electrifying our fleets, we don't have the energy capacity right now, at least in Ontario, to fulfill those needs. So you have that dichotomy, not even like, yeah, we have the urgency of needing to meet these targets, but then we also need to develop the right infrastructure. We have all the tools, though. We know exactly what we need to do and how much money to put towards it. So I think there can be some level of urgency emphasized, because, like Patty, for example, was asking about why do we subsidize the fossil fuel industry? I don't know. I agree. I don't understand why we subsidize the fossil fuel industry either. I think a lot of that money can be redirected towards, clean energy development, mainly, and among other things, like helping subsidize costs for fleets to be electrified, whatever the case. So I think in some realms, I think we need to go more at a, like, turtle wins the race pace when it comes to developing relationships with our MPs. But then I feel like the demands need to be, we need to do this fast. So yeah, it's a little bit of a balance that you need to strike. And I don't really know what the right answer is. So with that in mind, going to your second question of, do I have hope? If you had asked me maybe like 4 months ago, no. especially seeing what's going on south of the border, because although I like to say, yeah, it's the US, is not impacting us, it does impact everyone on a global level. So when I think about certain politics, and even here in Canada, I don't feel hopeful. But at the same time, like when I talk to individual people and when I see people that aren't like on a political or powerful stage who do care, there are a lot more people than you think who do value it and do want it. And also, even from the politicians you wouldn't expect care, they actually do. Like my conservative MP who I lobbied, he was like, I drive an electric vehicle, I have kids who are all under the age of 5, I care about their future, I do want to see a sustainable future. And he was telling me that even like a lot of people criticize Poilievre, and I don't want to get too partisan on this, but he was saying how a lot of people, criticize Poilievre, but he does also value the environment. And if you look closely at not what what the mainstream media is communicating about him, he does have certain policies that he wants to put forward to help address climate change. So yeah, I do now a little bit more, seeing what happened in the elections in New York, because it's someone who represents the people was elected. So I think as long as we have representative, someone who represents the general population, which I feel like, and statistically speaking, I think over 60 or 70% of Canadians said that climate change is a priority for them. So people know there are people out there who care. It's just a matter of electing the right people. So I try to remain hopeful. Yeah, thank you for the question.
I was saying thank you for that. It's yeah, I think a lot of us go from being hopeful to being non-hopeful, and then I think if we don't hope, we obviously hope is useless without action, but I think action is also useless without hope. And so yeah, it's important to keep that out there. Guy, you had your hand up.
Of course, I don't have a question. But I did have a comment that I wanted to make based on what some of the things that Patty was saying and what Vanessa was saying as well, which is building relationships with our politicians. And we are lucky that we live in a small community where that is possible. We have, like I've kind of accidentally met with Emma, whatever her Harrison, 4 times before we went down to Ottawa, and we have the opportunity to build a relationship with her because we live in a small community and we're all out there in that community. In addition, we have the ability to make relationships, which we try to do with our municipal politicians, because we live in a community where it's not so hard to get to know each other. This kind of thing is impossible in a place like Toronto. I shouldn't say impossible, but it's really difficult. Like if Vanessa met her MP from Vaughan, it would be a special occasion. Whereas here, you're going to run into these people at the grocery store. Take the time to talk to them and try to establish a relationship that will allow you to be able to talk to them in the future. I don't want to sound hopeful about this because in spite of the fact that I've met Emma Harrison 4 times, she's still not agreeing to meet with 4RGrandchildren during her constituency week this week. But we are lucky to live in a community where it's not so hard to make relationships with our leaders. And remember that our leaders are just people. And for you, David, I did mention earlier the quote from Star Wars, which is that rebellions are built on hope. Rebellions are built on hope. My daughter never stops saying that to me. She said, rebellions are built on hope, Dad. So we have to have hope. And without it, even if my hope meter is about as low as yours, it's not zero. It's not empty.
And who is it who
Neither.
said that hope is a verb? I think it might be Rebecca Solnit. I love that.
Yeah.
And hope and optimism are two different things. Maybe we're
Yeah.
not optimistic, but we want to be able to say that we did something as opposed to not. Like that was in your bio. You've always said that, Guy.
One day I'll tell you a story about somebody who introduced me as Oh, never mind. I'll tell you the story at your at your party. At your party, I can't tell you the part of the story. It has to be the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, Marilyn just says, quote, pessimism of the mind, optimism of the will. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that's another way of saying expect the worst and hope for the best.
So Cheryl has said, perhaps we need to ask new questions in ongoing conversations, like what is the commitment I or we hold that we can make a real difference? So what is the commitment I or we hold that we can make a real difference? What crossroads are we at in our personal life and the level of groups like 4RG when it comes to the climate crisis? Cheryl, can you unmute and say more about that? What are you thinking?
Thanks, Beth. I'm a great believer in asking questions and trying to get reframing of questions. Often we have conversations like this on Zooms, or we meet with our political representatives and they've heard the questions because we're not the only ones. Or we come into a Zoom like this and sometimes maybe it starts to sound a bit like an echo chamber. And I'm trying to find questions that break that open, that help us to pry the lid off the usual group of questions or can of questions that we have. And I collect questions, and I had these that I put in there as an example, just pinned up on my bulletin board over the screen, just to start a little thinking or to add to tonight's conversation. And I don't know what you think of them, or whether they take our conversations to a different level, or perhaps we need to sit back and meditate a little on what kind of questions are we asking? Are they effective? Are they going to make people say, "Ooh, I never thought of that"? Or we risk becoming an echo chamber.
I think that you have just given us an idea for an upcoming 4RG meets. You know, and I know Cheryl, you did some fabulous facilitation in the community with different groups, and you're so good at like raising the questions, seeing those common threads, and you know, moving forward with that. Yeah, let's talk.
I think I've just created some work for myself.
Yeah.
Well, you know, over to you. I'll just send you the email and say we need this done by. No, but seriously, I think it's really important. And you know, today I was thinking about you know, what's happened in the Philippines, and at the same time I'm thinking about, oh, we're flying to go see our children at Christmas time, and that like also thinking about I don't remember the number, but somebody was talking about the amount of carbon dioxide, you know, my buying a ticket contributes to the atmosphere, and then how much glacier ice is melted. And then I was like, okay, so I know it's hard to make a, you know, direct correlation between my carbon dioxide pollution and you know, forest fires, or but like what if, like, would that be a thing? Would that help us if we could take it from the abstract? We shouldn't fly. Okay, but this is to see my family. Okay, but we shouldn't fly. Okay, well, the glaciers are melting and we shouldn't fly. Oh, how many people are dying because I'm wanting to go on a holiday? You know what I mean? Like just making it very like way less abstract. And you know, what is the commitment that I can make to make a real difference? Like these are, and I was wondering even if I wanted to bring this up tonight, because it's just like such a, I'm not trying to guilt anybody. We are living, as Vanessa and we have said before, we live in a carbon-based society, and community and family is important. And how do you, like, how are people making those decisions?
We could spend a great deal of time as this group or any group trying to formulate the questions. What are the questions of our time?
Yeah, I love it.
But certainly asking different kinds of questions and thinking in different ways is how we're going to move forward. I mean, even just looking at the way we run our democracy or the way we run our economy or all those things. And you know, even in a question here, oops, I did have it here. Where did it go? I think it was Dana. Yeah, Dareth
yeah.
Kennedy. She was wondering whether we do or do not actually have enough electrical grid capacity to at least, you know, do electric vehicles, et cetera. And given that, you know, most of that charging takes place at night, which is when we tend to have surplus electricity. And to go along with that, if we rearrange the way grids are made and put them into kind of block grids, microgrids that join together to make macro grids, I mean, it's a whole new way of providing electricity and structuring the grid. That's just one area of asking different questions, looking at things in a different way. So clearly at some point there'll be a new way of doing things that will be part of this.
And Cheryl,
ongoing
if I can speak
solving.
on behalf of Cheryl, you can correct me, Cheryl, but you know, your question is often, how do we reduce the need for all of that electricity? Like, how do we all need to buy a smart car? You know, like just getting at the fundamental of our energy consumption and how we change that.
Mhm. Things are really entangled.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not, as a species or as a culture, prone to asking questions that are going to threaten some of our comforts, some of our cherished beliefs or
Yeah.
ways of acting. It's very hard to do,
It is.
to get to those questions and then to answer them.
Yeah. And maybe we don't always have to answer them, but we're all thinking about it and making our own, you know, doing our own discernment and.
Much food for thought. Linda and Alan, you have a question.
Well, it's not actually a question, it's just a comment. For our grandchildren, he's starting to mount a program to tell the Ford government that we're strongly opposed to their attempts to do away with a climate plan and stop keeping records on progress towards that. So I sent an email today to a number of the ministers, and I got an almost instant reply from one of them, for the Minister of Energy. And it was a reply. It wasn't exactly addressing what I sent in, but it was close enough. But it came within seconds. And I think what they're using is AI to pick up what's in a message and sending an appropriate reply. So I just thought it would be interesting in terms of talking to your politicians. They're using other things to get back to you. Don't take that initial message at face value. I think it's really important to then get back to them with your refutation or clarification of your questions. So it's just a comment about contacting politicians.
Right.
Fair
Thank you.
point. I hadn't really thought of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Vanessa.
Well, I just have a question to Alan. So, was that comment to MP Stephen Lecce by chance? MPP Stephen Lecce?
I must admit, I don't remember at the moment because I sent it to 2 or 3, but I think it was the Minister of Energy, but I can, I'll get back to you in seconds and let you know, okay?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
you sent a copy to me, Alan, and it was not from Lecce. It was from the Minister of Energy.
Todd somebody.
The
Yeah.
reply came back from somebody, not Lecce.
That's right. It was
Yeah,
Todd
yeah,
somebody.
right. No, I'm just wondering because my like the Vaughan MP, King Vaughan MPP is Stephen Lecce, and then he's also the Minister of Energy and Mines for Ontario. So I've been in correspondence with his office before, but I as a constituent, and I got a staffer responding back to me like back and forth. I'm sure they probably wrote the message with AI, but it was like a staffer signing off on it, so I knew who they were and their name and stuff. I find that weird. And you just did that like yesterday or today?
Yeah, it was Todd McCarthy.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, Todd McCarthy, who's the Minister of, I'm not sure at the moment. Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah. He's a member of the Parliament from Bowmanville.
Gotcha. Oh, interesting.
I believe Marilyn has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I have a comment, and it was sort of triggered by a word that Beth used, and the word was guilt. And she said, we don't want to guilt people into things. And I think I have been trying to live according to my values, but my values seem to guilt people. And I think it also reminded me of something else. Whatever. My decision not to fly has made people very uncomfortable. I'll just put that right out there. And then they think that I don't know, some kind of over the top kind of person. So it's many examples like that. The fact that I use a bicycle for transportation, the fact that I drive a hybrid car, it makes people feel guilty, but I haven't said anything to them. So my choices have made them feel guilty. But there's another thing that I wanted to address too, and it might be sort of related to something that Vanessa said. Way back when I was doing my master's at university, I was studying Michel Foucault. And he talked about how power works. And he had this really good image. And the image was, imagine a fishnet hung up in front of you, and various nodes where the netting crosses are nodes of power. Well, if you come this way and you want to push on that node of power, it'll just slip down to the next node or the next node. And so the thought behind that was you have to attack power from all the different angles all at the same time. And so when we talk about systemic push, when we talk about, or changes, when we talk about individual changes, all of it has to happen. You know, that movie Everywhere, Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's a good motto for our times. That's what we have to be doing.
That's a great image. I love that. Everything, and the movie was called Everything Everywhere All at
All at
Once.
once. I'm not suggesting watch the movie, but it is
no,
everything
but
everywhere
that's what
all at once happens in
the
that
pressure's
movie.
coming from everywhere, and yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to amplify what Marilyn was saying, but by saying that that's what this non-proliferation treaty is about, as well as having people decide not to fly and decide to to use less. We need to be attacking the producers, the diggers, who are digging the stuff up out of the ground. It's not good. It's not good enough to just attack this problem from one direction. It needs to be from both the production direction and the consumption direction.
Mhm.
Well, unless there's any more comments or questions, I think that wraps up this evening's meet. And yeah, I think there was a lot there to think about. And thank all our panel today for their contributions, as well as the many people that were making comments from the participants level. And
So thank you so much, everyone. So nice to see you here.
all right, special thanks to you, Vanessa, for joining our little group here.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Take care.
guys. So nice meeting you all.